Every Monday for 8 years, my husband would wake up before sunrise, grab a heavy bag, and say he was taking it to the trash. Every Monday for 8 years, I believed him until the day I decided to open that bag before he left the house. And what I saw inside destroyed everything I thought I knew about the man I shared my bed with. But before I tell you what was in that bag, I need you to understand who I am, where I came from, and why this story still hurts so much today, even after all these years. My name is Carmen Helena Rodriguez. I'm 78 years old. I was born on March 12, 1946, in a small town in rural Georgia that most people have never heard of. A town so small that everyone knew everyone, and where secrets didn't last long, or at least that's what I thought. Today I'm sitting here on the porch of my little house, a simple house I bought with my own sweat and my own hands after so much suffering. And I decided to tell this story because I know there are many women out there who went through what I went through. Women who suffered in silence, women who cried in secret, women who endured what they shouldn't have endured because they had no choice, because they had nowhere to go, because the world told them that's just how it had to be. But before I continue, I want to ask something of you. If you can, please leave a like on this video. Hit that like button down below. It really helps the Grandma's Diary channel grow and helps my story reach more people who need to hear it. If you're not subscribed yet, please subscribe now and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any stories. And tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from. What city, what state. It makes me so happy to know my voice is reaching far, to places I'll never see but that are now part of my life through these stories. So, let's begin. Let me go back to the beginning of everything. I was born into a very poor family. But when I say poor, it's not the kind of poverty you see today. It was real poverty, the kind that hurts to remember. My father worked on other people's farms because we never had land of our own. He'd leave the house when it was still dark and only come back after the sun had gone down. My mother stayed home taking care of me and my 7 siblings. That's right. We were 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. I was the 5th, right in the middle. Our house was a wooden shack with a dirt floor. No electricity, no running water, no indoor bathroom. We bathed in a tub in the backyard with water my mother drew from the well early in the morning. In winter, she'd heat the water on the wood stove so we wouldn't catch cold. In summer, the cold water was actually a relief. We slept on mattresses on the floor. There weren't enough beds for everyone. My father and mother slept in an old double bed that creaked every time someone moved. The boys slept in one room and the girls in another, all crowded together, side by side. At night, we'd hear the sounds of the countryside, crickets singing, sometimes a dog howling in the distance. We'd sleep scared, but we slept because tired children sleep anywhere. Food was whatever we had: rice, beans, grits, greens from the garden. Meat was a luxury. It appeared once in a while when my father managed to buy a piece of pork or when someone in the neighborhood slaughtered a chicken and shared. We picked fruit from the trees: peaches, apples, pears. That was the only sweetness in our lives because sugar was too expensive. Clothes were all hand-me-downs from one to another. I wore clothes my older sisters had already worn, mended so many times they sometimes looked more like patches than real clothes. Shoes were only for church on Sunday, and even then, not always. The rest of the week was barefoot, in mud, in dust, in whatever came. I went to school very little. I made it to 3rd grade, which today would be 3rd grade elementary. I learned to read, write my name, do basic math, but I had to stop because my mother needed help at home, and girls back then didn't need education. At least that's what everyone said. Girls needed to learn to cook, wash, iron, take care of house and husband. A woman's destiny was to marry and have children. No one ever asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. No one ever asked if I had dreams. And if I had dreams, I think I'd already forgotten them because life was so hard. My childhood was like that: work, poverty, and silence. We didn't complain because complaining didn't help. We didn't cry in front of others because crying was being weak. We swallowed our tears, swallowed our hunger, swallowed our desire to be more, to have more, to live more, and moved forward because there was no other way. When I turned 15, my mother started talking about marriage. She said I was becoming a young lady, that it was time to find a husband, that if I waited too long, I'd become an old maid. I didn't really know what marriage was. I mean, I knew the basics. It's when a man and woman go live together, have children, build a family. But I didn't understand the weight of it. I didn't know what it meant to give your entire life into someone else's hands. My father had an acquaintance who had a son. His name was Robert Patterson. He was 7 years older than me. He was already 22 when we met. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and big, calloused hands from work. He worked at a brick factory. It was hard work under the hot sun, carrying weight all day, but it was work. And back then, a man who worked was already considered a good catch. I remember the day he showed up at our house. It was on a Sunday after church. My father had arranged with his father for him to come have lunch with us. I didn't even know it was a kind of introduction, an arrangement. I thought it was just a regular visit. He arrived wearing a white shirt that looked new, hair slicked back with pomade, shoes polished. He greeted my father with a firm handshake, tipped his hat to my mother, and when he saw me, he looked at me in a way that made me lower my eyes. I wasn't used to that kind of look. A man's look at a woman, a look I didn't know how to interpret. Lunch was rice, beans, fried chicken with okra, grits. My mother went all out, even put a tablecloth on the table, something we only did on special occasions. I helped serve in silence, without looking at him. I could feel him watching me, but I didn't raise my head. After lunch, the men went to the yard to talk. The women stayed in the kitchen washing dishes. My mother looked at me and said quietly, "He likes you, Carmen. Your father already talked to his father. If everything goes well, you'll get married before the end of the year." I felt my heart tighten. Marry that man I barely knew. But I said nothing. I never said anything. Parents' wishes were law, and disobeying was a sin. In the following months, Robert showed up at our house every Sunday, always in the same white shirt, always with his hair slicked back, always with that look I couldn't decipher. We talked little. He spoke about work. I answered in monosyllables. He asked if I knew how to cook. I said yes. He asked if I knew how to sew. I said yes. He asked if I wanted to have children. I said yes. All the right answers for a marriage I didn't even know if I wanted. The marriage proposal was made to my father, not to me. I found out I was getting married when my mother called me to the room and said the date was set, November 20th, 1962. I was 16 years and 8 months old. He was 23. I didn't have a white wedding dress because we didn't have money for that. My mother sewed a simple dress from plain fabric with some lace trim she'd saved from somewhere. I put a little flower in my hair and walked to the church because the church was close to home and we didn't have a car or a carriage or anything. The ceremony was quick. The preacher said some words I don't really remember because my mind was elsewhere. I said yes when they asked if I accepted Robert as my husband. He said yes when they asked if he accepted me. And that was it. We were married. After the church, there was lunch at his parents' house. More people than at my introduction lunch, but still not many. Some relatives, some neighbors, some gossiping ladies who kept looking at me and whispering to each other. I smiled the whole time because that's what they expected of me. A happy bride, a fulfilled woman. Inside, I was terrified. That night, I went to his house, a little 2-room house he'd managed to rent near the brick factory. It was simple, but it was more than I'd had at my parents' house. It had a real bed with a mattress, a wood stove, a backyard with a wash tub and clothesline, a table with 2 chairs. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I won't talk about the wedding night because some things you keep to yourself. I'll just say I didn't know what to expect, that my mother never explained anything to me, and that I cried quietly in the dark after he fell asleep. Not from pain, but from fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the future, fear of having made the wrong choice. But was it really a choice if no one ever asked me what I wanted? The first months of marriage were about adjustment. I'd wake up early, make coffee, prepare his lunch. He'd go to work. I'd stay home cleaning, washing, cooking, waiting. He'd come back at the end of the day, tired, sweaty, smelling like clay, eat dinner in silence, take a bath, sleep, and the next day, it would all start over. We talked little. He wasn't a man of many words. He wasn't affectionate, wasn't one to give kisses or hugs or say he loved me. But he also wasn't violent, at least not in the beginning. He didn't raise his voice, didn't raise his hand. He was just distant, as if I were a house employee, not a wife. I got pregnant quickly. 3 months after the wedding, I was already expecting my first child. Robert received the news with a smile, the first real smile I'd seen on his face. He wanted a son to carry his name, to continue the family. When the boy was born in August 1963, he chose the name Robert Jr., same as his, as if the boy were an extension of him, not his own person. I loved my son from the first second, from the first cry, from the first look. I looked at that little creature, small, wrinkled, crying in my arms, and I felt a love I'd never felt before, a love that hurt from being so big, a love that gave me strength to continue. Then came the others. In 1965, the second was born, whom Robert called Peter, in honor of his father. In 1967, the third was born, who got the name Anthony in honor of my father. 3 boys, 3 mouths to feed, 3 reasons for me to endure everything that came after. And it was around that time, after Anthony was born, that I started to notice something strange. Every Monday, my husband would wake up earlier than usual, before sunrise, before the rooster crowed. He'd get up slowly, trying not to wake me, but I always woke up. A mother of 3 small children has light sleep. Any little noise wakes you up. I'd stay quiet, eyes closed, pretending I was still asleep, and I'd hear him moving in the dark, taking something, opening the back door, going to the yard. And every Monday he'd come back with a bag, a cloth bag, one of those heavy burlap ones. He'd put the bag in a corner near the front door and say it was trash, that he was going to throw it away on his way to work. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Trash is trash. Everyone has trash to throw away. But months went by, and that Monday bag became a routine, a strange routine. Why collect trash for a whole week and only throw it away on Monday? And why was the bag always so heavy? And why did he always manage to leave with it before I woke up properly, as if he didn't want me to see? Questions started appearing in my head, but I pushed them deep down. A wife doesn't question her husband. A wife trusts. A wife obeys. I repeated this to myself every time curiosity hit. But curiosity is a funny thing. The more you try to ignore it, the more it grows. It's like an itch you can't scratch. The more you try not to think about it, the more you think about it. And so the years passed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. 8 years of Mondays with that mysterious bag. 8 years of swallowed questions. 8 years of pretending everything was normal until that Monday in June 1970. The day everything changed, the day I finally opened the bag and discovered that the man I'd married, the father of my children, the man who slept next to me every night, was a complete stranger. Before I tell you about that Monday in June 1970, I need you to understand what my life was like in those years. Because you can't understand the weight of a discovery if you don't know the weight the person was already carrying before. Being married back then, my dears, was very different from today. Today, women have a voice, have choices, have freedom. They can work outside the home, can have bank accounts, can decide how many children they want or if they don't want any. They can get divorced if the marriage isn't working. They can start over. In the 1960s, none of that existed. A married woman was her husband's property. I'm not exaggerating. That's how society saw it. That's how the law treated it. Women couldn't open bank accounts without their husband's permission, couldn't work without their husband's permission, couldn't travel without their husband's permission, couldn't do almost anything without a man signing below, saying he allowed it. And divorce? Don't even think about it. Divorce didn't exist in America back then, the way it does now. Before the no-fault divorce laws, marriage was supposed to be forever, until death do you part. And if death took its time coming, too bad, you endured. So when I married Robert, I knew it was for life. There was no going back, no second chance. What I had was that, and I had to make it work, whatever the cost. The first years of marriage, as I already told you, were about adaptation. I was learning to be a wife, a housewife, a mother, all at the same time, all very quickly, all without an instruction manual. My mother taught me the basics: how to make rice, how to season beans, how to wash clothes by hand, how to iron with a coal iron. But the things that really mattered, the things inside the marriage, no one taught me. I learned alone, in shock, in mistakes, in pain. Robert, in the early days, was a common husband for that time. Hard-working, serious, quiet. He wasn't one to show affection, but he also wasn't one to mistreat. He'd come home tired, wanted food on the table and silence to rest. I quickly learned what he liked and didn't like. I learned not to make noise when he arrived. I learned not to complain when he didn't praise the food. I learned not to ask for anything because asking was bothering him. I learned to exist around him, like a shadow that makes no sound. When Robert Jr. was born in 1963, I thought things would change. I thought having a son would soften his heart, would bring us closer, would create a real family. And at first it seemed like it would. He'd hold the boy, caress his little head, smile in a way I'd never seen. I'd look at that scene and my heart would fill with hope. Maybe it would work out. Maybe we'd be happy. But hope didn't last long. When Robert Jr. was about 6 months old, Robert started to change. It wasn't a sudden change, one of those you notice overnight. It was gradual, slow, like a plant withering without you knowing why. He became more quiet, more distant, more absent. He'd come home from work and barely look at me, barely look at the child. He'd eat dinner in silence, smoke a cigarette in the yard, go to sleep. On weekends, he used to spend at home. He started going out. He said he was going to see friends, play cards, have a drink at the bar. He'd come back late, sometimes smelling like alcohol, sometimes smelling like perfume, women's perfume. The first time I smelled that scent, I pretended I didn't. I convinced myself it was my imagination, that it was the smell of cigarette smoke mixing with something else, that it was anything but what I was thinking. Because I couldn't think that. Thinking that was admitting my marriage had problems. It was admitting my husband might not be the man I thought he was. It was admitting I might have made a mistake, and I couldn't have made a mistake. Because if I had made a mistake, what was I going to do? Where would I go? With a small child in my arms, no education, no job, no money, nothing. So I swallowed it, swallowed the suspicion, swallowed the pain, swallowed the smell of perfume, and moved forward. In 1965, I got pregnant with Peter. The pregnancy was difficult. I was sick all the time, vomited everything I ate. I lost weight instead of gaining. The doctor said it was normal, that every pregnancy was different, that I needed to rest. But how to rest with a 2-year-old to take care of and a house to maintain? I worked anyway, just slower, more tired, more exhausted. Robert didn't even notice, or if he did, he didn't show it. He continued the same routine, work during the week, going out on weekends, silence at home, and those Mondays with the mysterious bag, which by then had become part of the landscape, so common I didn't pay attention anymore. Or rather, I tried not to pay attention. Peter was born in May 1965, in the same room where Robert Jr. had been born, with the same midwife, Mrs. Williams, a lady with rough hands and a soft heart who had been helping women in the region give birth since my grandmother's time. The birth was quick, quicker than the first. And when I heard my second son's cry, I cried too, from relief, from exhaustion, from an overflowing love. 2 boys, 2 sons, 2 reasons to continue. Robert wanted more. He wanted a big family, full of sons to carry his name. I didn't want anything more. My body was exhausted. My mind was exhausted. But a woman's will didn't count. When the husband wanted, the wife obeyed. There was no such thing as choosing, preventing, planning. We accepted what God sent, and God always sent one more. In 1967 came Anthony, my youngest, my boy with big eyes and an easy smile. He was born in March, at the beginning of autumn, when the tree leaves were starting to change color. I remember looking out the bedroom window, with him nursing at my breast, and seeing the yellow and red leaves falling slowly, and thinking that life was like that. Things are born, grow, change color, and one day they fall. Everything passes, everything changes, nothing stays. I didn't know yet how much that reflection would make sense later. With 3 small children, my life became a whirlwind. I'd wake before sunrise to make coffee, prepare the children, tidy the house. I'd spend the day washing clothes, cooking, cleaning, dealing with crying, hunger, sibling fights. I'd sleep after midnight, when I could sleep, because there was always a boy waking up with nightmares, thirst, fever, fear of the dark. I was exhausted in a way that went beyond the body. I was exhausted in my soul. And Robert? Robert continued with his routine. Work, come back, eat, sleep, go out on weekends. His life didn't change with the children. He didn't wake up at dawn to change diapers. He didn't stay home when a boy got sick. He didn't give up anything. The children were my responsibility, just like the house, the food, the clothes, everything. He worked and brought money. That was his role. The rest was with me. And the money, speaking of which, was never enough. The brick factory paid little, and with 3 children expenses only increased. Milk, medicine, clothes, shoes, food, everything cost money. And the money ran out before the end of the month. I learned to work miracles with little. I learned to cook with what I had, mend clothes until they couldn't be mended anymore, make toys from scraps so children wouldn't have nothing at Christmas. I sewed for others to earn some change, washed clothes for neighbors, made birthday cakes on order, all hidden from Robert because he didn't like me working. He said a man who lets his wife work is a man who can't support his family. And he had pride, a lot of pride. Too much pride to accept help. Too much pride to admit the money wasn't enough. But I knew it wasn't enough. I saw bills piling up, the store credit book full of debt, the grocer asking when we were going to pay. And I'd wonder quietly, in the silence of my head, where does the money go? Because the math didn't add up. He worked, he got paid, but there was never enough left over. And sometimes there wasn't enough, sometimes there was much too little. And I'd wonder how a hardworking man who didn't drink too much, who didn't gamble, who had no visible vices, could earn so little and spend so much. I would discover the answer was in that bag. I already mentioned the Monday bag, but let me explain better how this routine worked. Every Monday, without exception, Robert would wake up earlier than normal. Usually he woke up at 5 a.m., but on Mondays he woke up at 4:30 when it was still dark, when the roosters hadn't even crowed yet. He'd get up slowly, carefully, so as not to move the bed too much, and go to the back of the house. I'd hear his footsteps on the floorboards, hear the kitchen door opening, hear noises I couldn't identify. About 10 minutes later, he'd come back with a bag, a burlap bag, one of those for storing grain, closed with a tight knot, heavy. I could see it was heavy from the way he carried it, with both hands, straining. He'd put the bag near the front door and go have coffee, as if nothing had happened. When I first asked what it was, he answered without looking at me. Trash. I'm taking it to the trash. And I accepted it, because wives accepted back then. Wives didn't question, didn't doubt, didn't insist. When the husband spoke, it was spoken. But the years went by, and the bag became more and more present in my thoughts. So many things didn't make sense. First, what kind of trash weighed so much? Our kitchen trash was little, we had no waste, everything was used. Peels became fertilizer, leftovers became pig food for the neighbors. There wasn't this bulky, heavy trash that needed a bag that size. Second, why only on Mondays? The city garbage truck came on Tuesdays and Fridays. If he wanted to throw away trash, It would make more sense to throw it away on Monday to catch the Tuesday truck. But then, why not throw it away on Thursday too to catch Fridays? Why only one specific day of the week? Third, why did he wake up so early? Trash could wait. He could take the bag on his way to work at normal time. Why wake up at dawn, in the dark, in silence, as if hiding something? And fourth, the thing that bothered me most. Why did he take the bag to the back of the house and come back with it even heavier? Where did that weight come from? What was he putting in there that wasn't there before? I thought 1,000 things. I thought he might be stealing from work, bricks or tiles to sell on the side. I thought he might be hiding money somewhere in the yard and taking it away bit by bit. I thought he might be involved in something wrong, smuggling, gambling, crime. Your mind travels when you don't have answers. Your mind invents what it doesn't know. But I never opened the bag. For 8 years, I never had the courage to open it. Fear. It was fear. Fear of discovering something I didn't want to know. Fear of destroying the illusion I still had that my marriage was normal. Fear of confirming the suspicions I pushed to the back of my mind. Fear of having to take action if I discovered something wrong. Because taking action meant change, and change meant risk. And risking with 3 small children was something I couldn't afford to do. So I swallowed this too. I swallowed the curiosity, swallowed the suspicion, swallowed the desire to know, and kept pretending everything was normal. But life, my dears, has a way of pushing us toward the truth, even when we don't want it, even when we do everything to run away. In 1970, something changed in me. I can't explain exactly what it was. Maybe it was the accumulation of years of doubt. Maybe it was courage that appeared from I don't know where. Maybe it was the fact that my boys were growing up and I started wondering what example I was setting for them. What kind of woman was I? A woman who accepts everything silently? A woman who pretends not to see? A woman who's afraid to even look inside a bag? I didn't want to be that woman. I didn't want my children to see their mother as a weak, submissive, blind person. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be brave. I wanted to be the kind of woman who faces the truth, even if the truth hurts. And it was with that thought that I woke up on that Monday in June 1970. It was cold, a damp cold, of late autumn, the kind that gets into your bones. I had slept badly. The boys had been coughing and woke up several times during the night. When I felt Robert get up at 4:30, as always, I was already awake, looking at the dark ceiling. I heard his footsteps leaving the room, heard the kitchen door opening, heard the usual noises, the noises I'd learned to ignore. And then I made a decision. Today, I'm going to see what's in that bag. My heart raced just thinking about it. My hands started sweating. I felt a knot in my throat, a desire to give up, to pretend I was sleeping, to let this Monday pass like all the others. But no, not this time. This time, I was going to have courage. I waited for him to go back to the kitchen for coffee. I got up slowly, put a shawl over my shoulders because of the cold, and went toward the front door where he had left the bag. There it was, as always, a burlap bag closed with a knot, leaning against the wall, heavy. I looked back to make sure he was still in the kitchen. I could hear him moving things around, heating coffee on the stove. I had a few minutes, just a few minutes. My hands were shaking when I crouched down to untie the knot. The knot was tight, as if he wanted it to be hard to open. Or maybe that was just my impression. Maybe I was looking for meaning where there wasn't any. I managed to undo the knot. I opened the bag, and what I saw inside, my dears, made my world collapse. It wasn't trash. It wasn't stolen bricks. It wasn't hidden money. It was clothes. Children's clothes, little girls' clothes, lace dresses, doll shoes, frilly socks, hair ribbons, all brand new, all wrapped with care, all smelling like baby soap. I had 3 sons, 3 boys. I had never bought girls' clothes in my life. And there in that bag that my husband had been taking every Monday for 8 years, saying it was trash, was a complete wardrobe for a child who wasn't mine. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I stayed there kneeling on the floor with those little clothes in my hands, feeling the world spin around me. And it was at that moment I heard his voice behind me. "What are you doing, Carmen?" My blood froze, my whole body paralyzed. I closed my eyes, wanting this to be a nightmare, wanting to wake up in my bed and discover none of it was real. But it was real. It was all real. And my life at that moment was divided into two parts, before opening the bag and after. "What are you doing, Carmen?" His voice cut through the silence like a blade. A voice I'd known for years, that I heard every day, but that at that moment sounded like a stranger's voice, cold, hard, with a tone I'd never heard before. A tone that made me feel real fear. I stayed kneeling on the floor with the little girl's clothes in my hands, unable to move. My body wouldn't obey. My legs had turned to stone. My arms had turned to lead. My heart was beating so hard I thought he'd hear it, that he'd hear every accelerated beat and know the size of my desperation. I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. Words had disappeared from my mouth, had fled from my head. All that existed at that moment was the weight of those clothes in my hands and the weight of his gaze on my back. He approached. I heard the footsteps on the floorboards, each one heavier than the other. He stopped behind me, so close I could feel the warmth of his body, the smell of coffee he'd just drunk. And then he spoke again, this time lower, almost in a whisper. "I asked what you're doing." It was the whisper that gave me strength, because it wasn't a whisper of concern, wasn't a whisper from someone who wants to explain. It was a whisper of threat, from someone who's angry, from someone who was caught doing something wrong and is trying to turn the tables, putting the blame on whoever discovered it. And I thought, the blame isn't mine. The blame was never mine. I didn't do anything wrong. I just opened a bag. He's the one who has to explain. That anger gave me courage, a courage I didn't know I had. Courage that came from a deep place, a place I'd forgotten existed. The courage of a woman who can't swallow anymore. I got up slowly, turned to him, looked in his eyes for the first time in a long time, and spoke with a voice I didn't even recognize as mine. A firm voice, a voice that didn't tremble. "Girls' clothes, Robert. There are girls' clothes in this bag. Girls' clothes that aren't for our sons. So explain to me. Explain whose clothes these are." He didn't answer right away. He stood there looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Surprise, anger, fear, maybe a bit of everything. He didn't expect me to confront him. He didn't expect me to have the courage to ask. After so many years of silence, of acceptance, of pretending not to see, he'd gotten used to a woman who didn't question. And now that woman was standing in front of him, demanding answers. Seconds passed that seemed like hours. The silence was so heavy I could almost touch it. And then he did something I didn't expect. He shrugged. Simply shrugged, as if I'd asked what time it was, as if the question had no importance at all. "It's for a coworker's daughter. He's going through hard times. I help when I can. Satisfied?" The lie was so obvious it made me nauseous because I knew Robert. I'd known him for 8 years. I knew he wasn't a generous man, wasn't a man to help others, wasn't a man to worry about co-workers' children. He barely worried about his own children. He was going to spend money, money that was scarce at home, money I counted penny by penny, to buy clothes for a co-worker's daughter? No, it didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. I looked at him and said slowly, chewing each word, "You're lying." He scowled. His eyes darkened, his jaw clenched. He took a step toward me, and for a second I thought he was going to raise his hand. I prepared for the blow, hunched my shoulders, closed my eyes, but the blow didn't come. When I opened my eyes, he was taking the bag from my hands forcefully, tying it again, throwing it over his back. "You don't know anything, Carmen. You're just an ignorant woman who didn't study, who doesn't understand anything about life. Stay quiet and take care of your house. That's what you know how to do." And he left. He slammed the door behind him so hard the whole house shook. I stood in the middle of the living room, alone, with the echo of the slamming door in my ears and the echo of his words in my heart. Ignorant, Ignorant woman who didn't study. The words hurt more than a slap because they were true, at least partially. I had no education, I had no knowledge, I didn't understand many things. But I wasn't stupid, I wasn't blind, and I could recognize a lie when I heard one. That day, I couldn't do anything right. I burned the rice, let the beans boil over, forgot to fetch water from the well. The boys noticed I was strange. Robert Jr. asked if I was sick. Peter asked me to play with him, and I couldn't. I was there, but I wasn't. My body was in that house taking care of tasks, but my mind was far away. My mind was trying to understand, trying to put the pieces together, trying to find an explanation that made sense. And there wasn't one. There was no explanation that made sense. The only possible explanation was the one I didn't want to admit, the one I'd pushed to the back of my mind for 8 years, the one that would explain everything. The weekend outings, the smell of perfume, the money that never lasted, the distance, the coldness, the Monday bags. My husband had another woman, and with her he had a daughter. The idea was so painful I couldn't process it. It was as if someone had stuck a knife in my chest and kept turning it slowly, tearing everything inside. I cried that day. I cried hidden in the bathroom so the boys wouldn't see. I cried until I had no more tears. And when the tears dried up, there was just emptiness, a huge, cold emptiness that took over everything. But along with the emptiness came a decision. I needed to know. I needed to be sure. I needed to see with my own eyes to believe. I was going to follow him. The idea was risky. If he found out, I didn't know what he was capable of doing. But I couldn't live with doubt anymore. Doubt was eating me from the inside, destroying me slowly. I'd rather know the truth, however painful it was, than continue living in that lie. It took a week for me to get up the courage, a week of pretending everything was normal, of looking at him and smiling as if nothing had happened, of swallowing anger and pain every time he came near. He noticed I was different. I know he did, but he said nothing. Maybe he thought I'd forgotten. Maybe he thought I'd accepted his explanation. Maybe he thought I was too stupid to suspect. The following Saturday, he said he was going out, said he was going to see friends, that he'd be back late so I shouldn't wait up. The same story as always. The same lie as always. But this time, I was prepared. I had arranged with Mrs. Williams, the midwife who had helped with my boys' births, to leave the children with her for a few hours. I said I needed to go downtown to resolve some things, and she accepted without asking too much. She liked my boys, and they liked her. She was one of the few people I trusted. When Robert left the house, I waited about 10 minutes. My heart was racing, my hands were sweating, my stomach was churning. I put on a simple dress, a scarf on my head to disguise myself, and went after him. He went on foot, walked through the dirt streets of our neighborhood, past the town square, past the church, and continued walking toward a part of town I didn't know well, a more remote part where the houses were smaller and simpler, where the poorest families lived. I kept my distance. I walked slowly, pretending I was strolling, stopping once in a while to look at a shop window, to tie my shoe, anything that would justify being there. My heart was beating so loud I was sure everyone could hear, but no one looked at me. No one cared about one more woman walking down the street on a Saturday afternoon. He walked for about 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. And then he stopped in front of a house. It was a small house with a low roof and just one front window. It had a yard surrounded by an old wooden fence with some chickens pecking at the ground. There was a mango tree in the corner loaded with fruit. There was a clothesline with clothes drying in the sun, women's clothes, children's clothes. He didn't knock on the door. He didn't need to. He simply opened it and entered as if it were his house, as if he lived there. I stood on the other side of the street, hidden behind a wall, looking, waiting, not knowing what to do. And then the door opened again, and a woman appeared. She was younger than me, much younger. She must have been in her early 20s at most. She was pretty in a simple way, with long black hair and brown skin. She wore a flowered cotton dress and was barefoot, and in her arms was a little girl, a girl about 4 or 5 years old, with ribbons in her hair, wearing a lace dress, the same dress I'd seen inside the bag. Robert appeared behind them. He put his hand on the woman's shoulder, leaned down and kissed the little girl's forehead. The girl smiled, stretched her little arms to him, and he picked her up. He spun her in the air, made her laugh. Then he hugged them both together, the woman and the child, in a hug I had never received from him. I saw everything. I saw every gesture, every smile, every caress. I saw the man I thought I knew transform into another person, a person who showed affection, who played, who hugged, a person he had never been for me. And I understood everything. He wasn't cold, because that's how he was. He was cold with me. He wasn't distant, because he didn't know how to show affection. He was distant from me. All the love he had, all the affection he was capable of giving, he gave to her, to the other woman, to the woman he had chosen to love, while I was just the woman he'd been forced to marry. The pain I felt at that moment is impossible to describe. It was as if someone had ripped my heart from my chest and stepped on it. It was as if the ground had opened under my feet and I was falling into an endless hole. It was as if everything I thought was my life, everything I had built, everything I had endured, was a lie, a big 8-year lie. I don't know how long I stood there, looking. Minutes, hours. Time had lost meaning. Everything had lost meaning. I saw them enter the house, saw the door close, saw the chickens continue pecking in the yard as if nothing had happened. The world kept turning, the sun kept shining, life kept going, but my life had stopped. I went home in a state of shock. I don't remember the way, don't remember if anyone saw me, don't remember anything. I only remember arriving at Mrs. Williams' house, picking up my children, thanking her with a fake smile, taking them home, making dinner, putting them to bed. All on autopilot, all without feeling. When the boys were asleep, I sat in the kitchen and stared at nothing. The house was silent, a silence that weighed, that suffocated, that screamed all the things I couldn't scream. He had another family. For how long? Since when? The girl was about 5 years old, so at least 6 years. 6 years of lies, 6 years of betrayal, 6 years of me waking up next to a man who was going to sleep with another woman. 6 years of me washing his clothes, making his food, raising his children while he spent our money on another woman, another child. The Monday bag was for this. It was for this. Every Monday he took things to another house, clothes, food, money, I don't know what. Everything that was missing from our house was going there. Everything I saved, everything I worked miracles to stretch, he took and gave to her. I thought about my children sleeping in the room with mended clothes, with holes in their shoes, with scrap toys, and I thought about that girl in her lace dress, with ribbons in her hair, with doll shoes. Everything new, everything bought. While mine went without, his other daughter had everything. Anger came with the pain, an anger I'd never felt before. An anger that burned, that consumed, that made my blood boil. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break everything. I wanted to go to that house and drag that woman by the hair, show her who the real wife was, who had the legitimate children, who had the right to be with him. But I didn't do any of that because along with anger came shame. The shame of being the betrayed woman, the shame of not having noticed earlier, the shame of having believed the lies, of having accepted the excuses, of having been so blind, so stupid, so naive. And fear came. Fear of telling someone and becoming the subject of gossip. Fear of confronting him and getting beaten. Fear of asking for separation and ending up on the street with no house, no money, nothing. Fear of losing my children because back then children stayed with the father. The mother had no rights. Fear of everything. So I did what I always did. I swallowed it. I swallowed the anger, swallowed the pain, swallowed the shame, swallowed the fear, pushed it all to a dark corner inside me, locked it with a key, and pretended it didn't exist. When Robert came home that night, late, smelling like cheap perfume and alcohol, I pretended to be asleep. He lay down next to me, turned to the other side, and in a few minutes was snoring as if nothing had happened, as if life were normal. And I stayed there with my eyes open in the dark, looking at the ceiling, listening to him breathe, feeling the warmth of his body next to mine, the body of a stranger, the body of a man I didn't know, the body of the father of my children, who was also the father of another child. I didn't sleep that night or the nights that followed. Sleep had gone away along with innocence, along with trust, along with any hope I still had that my marriage could work. I had discovered the truth I wanted to know, the truth I needed to know. But now that I knew, what was I going to do? I had 3 children, no education, no job, no money, nowhere to go. The house was his, the money was his, life was his. I was just an accessory, an object that was part of the furniture. If I confronted him, what would happen? Would he apologize? Would he leave the other woman? Would he change, or would he beat me, kick me out of the house, leave me on the street? If I left, where would I go? To my parents' house, who barely had food for themselves, with 3 small children to support. If I told someone, who would help me? The church would tell me to forgive and keep the family together. Society would say I should have taken better care of my husband. The law would say I had no rights. I was trapped in a marriage of lies, in a life of lies, in a role of wife that meant nothing, trapped without bars, but trapped nonetheless. And that's how I spent the following years, knowing everything, pretending to know nothing. But this, my dears, is a pain I'll tell in the next part because I need a moment for myself. Telling this part takes me back to that street, to that house, to that scene I could never forget. Even after so many years, even having overcome so much, there are wounds that heal but leave scars forever. My scar is here in my chest, where my heart broke that day. Have you ever had to pretend everything's okay when inside everything is shattered? Have you ever had to smile when what you wanted was to scream? Have you ever had to say good morning to the person who destroyed your life? Have you ever had to sleep next to someone you can't look in the eye anymore? That's how I lived for years. Years that seemed like centuries, years that aged me inside long before I aged outside. After that Saturday when I saw everything with my own eyes, my life became an act, a play I was forced to perform every day without rest, without intermission, without applause. I'd wake up and put on the mask of a wife, make coffee, tidy the house, take care of the boys, and pretend. Pretend I didn't know, pretend it didn't hurt. Pretend that man sitting at my table, eating the food I made, was still my husband. But he wasn't my husband anymore. Not to me. To me, he had become a stranger who lived in my house, a ghost that took up space, that made noise, that demanded things, but didn't really exist. The Robert I'd known, or thought I'd known, had died that day. In his place was an empty shell, a man I looked at and no longer recognized. The first months after the discovery were the worst. Every time he left the house, I knew where he was going. Every time he came back late, I knew where he was coming from. Every time he arrived with that perfume smell, I knew whose perfume it was. And I had to stay quiet, had to swallow it, had to pretend I didn't notice anything. You can't imagine what it's like to live like that. What it's like to have to control yourself every second so you don't explode. What it's like to bite your tongue so hard that sometimes I tasted blood. What it's like to lie in bed at night and stare at the ceiling, wanting to cry but not being able to because he was next to me and might wake up and ask what was wrong. I developed a skill no woman should need to have. The skill of disconnecting, of separating mind from body, of being physically present but absent in everything else. When he came near me, I'd disconnect. When he wanted to fulfill his husbandly duties, I'd disconnect. My body was there, but I wasn't. I'd go to a faraway place, a place inside my head where he couldn't reach me. It was the only way to survive. The Mondays continued the same. He'd wake up early, take the bag, and leave. But now I knew what was inside. I knew where it was going. I knew that everything he took in that bag was something missing from my children. and the anger I felt was so much that sometimes I thought I'd suffocate. There was one Monday, a few months after the discovery, when I did something I'd never done before. He left with the bag, and I went to the yard, to the place where he kept the things he took. It was a corner behind the chicken coop, hidden, where there were some old crates. I opened the crates and saw what he was collecting during the week to take the following Monday. There was food, rice, beans, sugar, coffee, things I rationed at home to last the whole month, things I told the boys we didn't have when they asked for more. He was taking from our pantry and taking it to another house. There was money, not much, but there was. Some bills folded and hidden at the bottom of the crate. Money he said he didn't have when I asked to buy medicine for Peter, who had a cough. Money that disappeared from his pay, and he said he'd used to pay bills. And there were gifts, small toys, hair ribbons, a little rag doll, presents for his daughter, the daughter he'd never denied existed, but that I should never have discovered. I stayed there kneeling in the dirt, looking at those things, and I cried. I cried from anger, from sadness, from helplessness. I cried because my children sometimes went to bed hungry while he fed another family. I cried because I washed his clothes, made his food, took care of his house, and he paid me with lies and betrayal. I cried because I was trapped in a situation with no way out and I didn't know what to do. I thought about taking everything and throwing it away. I thought about burning it. I thought about confronting him when he got home from work, throwing those things in his face, screaming everything I was feeling. But I didn't do any of that because I was afraid. Afraid of what he'd be capable of doing if I confronted him. Afraid of losing my children. Afraid of ending up on the street. Afraid of everything. So I put the things back in the crate, arranged them the way they were, wiped my tears, and went back inside the house to continue pretending. Life continued at that pace for years. 1970 became 1971. 71 became 72. And I stayed there in the same house, in the same marriage, in the same lie. The boys grew up, went to school, became people. Robert Jr. was already 8 years old, Peter was 6, Anthony was 4. They were my only reason to get out of bed in the morning, my only light in all that darkness. I tried to protect them from what was happening. I tried not to fight with Robert in front of them. I tried not to cry where they could see. I tried to maintain an appearance of normalcy. But children notice things. Children feel when something's wrong, even if they can't explain what. Robert Jr., who was the oldest, started getting quiet. He, who was a happy child, talkative, full of energy, slowly closed up. He stopped playing in the street with friends, stopped telling me how his day at school was, stopped asking for things. He'd stay in a corner alone with a sad look that broke my heart. Once I asked him what was happening, and he said something I never forgot. He said he didn't like seeing his father being mean to me, that he didn't like hearing his father speaking rudely, that he wanted us to be a happy family like the families in cartoons. I hugged him so tight I thought I'd crush him, and whispered in his ear that one day everything would be okay, that one day we'd be happy. I didn't know how. I didn't know when, but I promised. Peter was different. He reacted with anger. He'd hit his brothers, talk back, break things. I knew that anger wasn't his. It was anger he absorbed from the environment, from the heavy climate that reigned in that house. But I didn't know how to help. I could barely help myself. Anthony, the youngest, was the one who understood least. He was still too small to notice the details, but he felt the tension. Sometimes he'd wake up at dawn crying, calling for me, saying he'd had a nightmare. I'd go to his room, lie next to him, caress him until he fell asleep again. And many times I'd sleep right there, on the narrow mattress with my son in my arms, because it was the only place in the house where I felt at peace. Robert, meanwhile, became more and more distant. He barely talked to me, barely looked at me. When he came home, he'd go straight to the yard to smoke. Then he'd eat dinner in silence, watch a little television that we'd bought on installments, and go to sleep. On weekends, he'd disappear. Sometimes he'd come back Sunday night, sometimes only Monday morning. And I didn't ask anything anymore. There was no point. The community started noticing something was wrong. Neighbors commented, gossips gossiped. At the market, people looked at me strangely. In a small town, nothing stays hidden for long. Someone must have seen him entering that house. Someone must have commented to someone who commented to someone. And suddenly, everyone knew, except the wife. Or at least that's what they thought. A neighbor of mine, Mrs. Johnson, a sharp-tongued lady who loved knowing about other people's lives, came to my house one day with the excuse of borrowing sugar. I knew she didn't want sugar. She wanted information, wanted to see my reaction, wanted to find out if I knew or not. She kept circling, asking indirect questions, saying things like, "Your husband's been working a lot lately, hasn't he? I hardly see him around here. A man who goes out too much ends up finding trouble on the street." I answered everything with monosyllables, without giving openings, without showing anything. And when she left, frustrated for not getting the gossip she wanted, I closed the door and leaned against it, trembling. The shame of being the betrayed woman was almost as heavy as the pain of betrayal. Because back then, when a man cheated, it was the woman's fault. The woman didn't know how to keep her husband. The woman didn't take care of her appearance. The woman didn't do what she had to do to keep him at home. The other woman was a homewrecker, yes, but the wife was incompetent. That's how society thought. That's how people judged. I felt judged all the time. When I went to Sunday Mass, I felt the looks on my back. When I went to the market, I heard whispers when I passed. When the boys came back from school, sometimes they came back quiet, and I knew someone had said something. Children are cruel. Children repeat what they hear at home. And what was heard in the houses of that town was that Carmen was a poor thing who didn't know how to keep her husband. I wanted to scream to everyone that it wasn't my fault, that I hadn't done anything wrong, that I was a good wife, a good mother, that I'd done everything I could. But screaming wouldn't help. People had already formed their opinions, people had already chosen sides, and their side was never with the betrayed woman. The family didn't help either. I went once to my mother's house when I couldn't stand keeping it to myself anymore. I told her everything, crying, hoping for a hug, hoping for advice, hoping for some kind of support. And you know what she told me? She said men are like that they're all the same, that my father also had his things, and she always turned a blind eye because that's what a good wife does. She said I had to think about my children, that children need a father, that a broken family is shame for everyone. She said I had to pray, ask God for strength and endure, because women endure. Women always endure. I went home that day more destroyed than when I left. The person I thought would support me, who would be on my side, who would help me find a way out, simply told me to accept and stay quiet. My own mother. And the worst part is that, in a way, I understood her. She wasn't being mean. She was being realistic. She was telling me what life had taught her, what society had taught all the women of her generation and mine, that a woman's role was to endure, that a woman's destiny was to suffer silently, that there was no other option. But something inside me refused to accept that. Something small, hidden, almost extinguished, but still alive. A flame that insisted on not dying, no matter how much everything tried to put it out. The years went by and the situation got worse. Robert started drinking more. Before he only drank on weekends, but later he started drinking during the week too. He'd come home smelling like liquor, with red eyes, with altered mood. And when he drank, he became aggressive. At first it was just verbal aggression. He'd yell, curse, say horrible things. He'd call me useless, ugly, stupid. He'd say he'd married me out of pity, that I was worthless, that he deserved better. I'd listen silently, looking at the floor, waiting for him to get tired and go to sleep. And then I'd go to the bathroom to cry hidden so the boys wouldn't see. But one day the aggression stopped being just verbal. I won't go into details because some things hurt too much to remember. I'll just say there was a night when he came home drunk and I was too tired to pretend everything was okay. I must have made some face, some gesture, something he didn't like, and he raised his hand. The first slap hurt less on my face than in my soul because there I realized I'd crossed a line with no return. There I realized the man I'd married, the father of my children, was capable of hurting me not just with words, not just with betrayal, but with his own hands. I fell to the floor from the force of the blow. He stood there looking at me as if even he couldn't believe what he'd done. Then he went to the room and slept, leaving me there fallen, alone, in the dark. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of the kitchen with a wet cloth on my face that was starting to swell, thinking about what my life had become. I was 25 years old, only 25, and I was already old inside, already dead inside. I looked out the window and saw the sky starting to lighten. Another day coming, another day of pretending, of enduring, of surviving. How many more days could I manage? And it was at that moment, that dawn, looking at the sun rise through an eye that was almost closed from swelling, that I made a decision. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but one day I was going to get out of that situation. One day I was going to gather courage, gather strength, gather whatever was necessary, and leave with my children to somewhere that man could never reach me again. It wasn't easy. It took years, took more pain, more tears, more sleepless nights. But that decision made that dawn was the beginning of everything. It was the seed I planted inside myself that slowly, very slowly grew until it became enough strength to change my life. But this, my dears, I'll tell in the last part of this story because the hardest part has passed, the darkest part is behind us. What comes now is the part I most like to tell, the part where I stopped being a victim and became a survivor, the part where I took the pieces of my life and built something new, something mine, something no one can ever take from me again. I spent many years of my life believing I had no choice, believing that a woman like me's destiny was to endure silently, accept whatever came, and pray for God to give me strength. I believed this because that's what they taught me, what my mother taught me, what society taught me, what life taught me. But there was a moment when I stopped believing. There was a moment when I looked at my life, looked at my children, looked in the mirror, and said to myself, enough, no more. I'd rather die trying to change than continue living like this. That moment didn't come overnight. It was built little by little, brick by brick, pain by pain. Every tear I swallowed was a brick. Every slap I took was a brick. Every night I spent awake looking at the ceiling was a brick. And when the wall got high enough, I realized it wasn't a prison. It was a fortress I'd built inside myself without realizing it, and that would now protect me when it was time to fight. After that dawn, when I decided I was leaving, I started preparing. It wasn't quick preparation, it wasn't easy preparation. It was years of preparation, done in silence, done in shadows, done without anyone knowing. The first thing I did was start saving money. Every penny I could get, I hid. The money I earned sewing for others, washing clothes, making cakes, everything went to a hiding place only I knew. It was a hole behind a loose stone in the yard wall, covered with dirt, invisible to anyone who didn't know it was there. I'd go there every week, put in a little more, and count what I had. It was little, very little, but it was mine. It was the beginning of my freedom. The second thing I did was start studying again. Not real school because I had no time or conditions for that, but I took my children's books, the school books, and started reading. At night, when everyone was asleep, I'd light a candle and read until my eyes burned. I wanted to learn. I wanted to prepare. I knew that if I left, I'd need to work for real, and to work, I needed to know more than I knew. The third thing I did was start paying attention to other women, women who had managed to separate, women who lived alone, women who worked and supported their children without husbands. They existed, even if they were few, even if they were looked down upon by society. I observed them from afar, trying to understand how they'd done it, what they'd faced, how they'd survived. And every story I discovered gave me more hope. There was one woman in particular who marked me a lot. Her name was Frances, but everyone called her Miss Fran. She was a seamstress who lived on the other side of town in a little rented house with 3 children, just like me. Her husband had left years ago, disappeared with another woman, and she was left behind with the children and debts. Everyone thought she'd go back to her parents' house, that she'd become a beggar, that she'd be lost. But she didn't get lost. She rolled up her sleeves and went to work. She sewed day and night, made clothes for the whole town, raised her children alone. And when I met her, the children were already grown, working, helping at home. She had made it. I went to talk to Miss Fran one afternoon with the excuse of ordering a dress, but really I wanted to hear her story, wanted to understand how she'd done it. And she told me everything with that calm voice of someone who'd already been through the worst and survived. She said something I never forgot. She said, "Carmen, we always think we can't handle it, but when there's no other way, we discover a strength we didn't even know we had. The secret is taking the first step. The rest comes." The first step was what I needed to take, but the first step was the hardest because it meant confronting. It meant opening my mouth and saying words I'd never said. It meant looking at Robert and saying I knew everything, that I didn't accept it anymore, that I wanted to leave. And I was afraid, very afraid, afraid of his reaction, afraid of violence, afraid of what could happen. The years passed while I prepared. 1973, 74, 75. My children grew up. Robert Jr. was already 12. Peter was 10. Anthony was 8. They weren't little children anymore. They were boys who understood things, who saw what was happening at home, who suffered with me even without speaking. Robert got worse over time. He drank more and more, worked less and less. He lost his job at the brick factory because of drinking, got another job, lost it again. The money, which was already little, became even less, and the aggression increased. It wasn't just once in a while anymore. It was always. Anything was reason for him to yell, to curse, to raise his hand. I learned to dodge. I learned to read the signs, to notice when he was about to explode, to get away before the worst happened. But I didn't always succeed. Sometimes he caught me off guard. Sometimes the blows came before I could react. And I'd go to sleep with my body aching, counting days, counting the coins hidden in the wall, asking myself when it would be enough, when I'd have courage. In 1977, something happened that changed everything. Something I'd been waiting for years, without even knowing I was waiting. No-fault divorce was becoming more accepted in America. I remember the day I found out. It was on television, on the news, and I stopped everything I was doing to listen. The reporter talked about changing laws, about divorce becoming easier, that allowed couples to separate legally without having to prove fault. For the first time in the history of many states, a marriage could be undone for real. Not just a separation, but a real divorce. I stood paralyzed in front of the television, with my heart beating hard, with tears running down my face. It was possible. It was finally possible. I could separate. I could be free. The law was now on my side. Of course it wasn't that simple. The law existed, but there were still many restrictions, much prejudice, much bureaucracy. A divorced woman was still looked down upon, still judged, still suffered consequences. But at least now there was a legal path. Now I had a tool I didn't have before. I started getting information about how it worked. I went to the town library, asked a girl who worked there for help, and she explained the basics. She said I'd need a lawyer, that I'd have to prove some things, that it would take time. But it was possible. The problem was the lawyer. A lawyer cost money, and the money I had saved was still little. I'd need more time. But then something happened that speeded everything up. It was on a night in August 1978. Robert came home completely drunk, more drunk than I'd ever seen him. He could barely stand, stumbled over furniture, spoke slurred. I tried to become invisible, went to the corner of the kitchen waiting for him to go to sleep, but he didn't. He came to me with a rage in his eyes that froze my blood. He started screaming that I was to blame for everything, that his life was a disgrace because of me, that he'd married the wrong woman. I stayed quiet, as I always did, waiting for it to pass. But this time it didn't pass. He came at me with a violence I'd never seen. He pushed me against the wall, put his hands on my neck, squeezed. I couldn't breathe. I saw everything getting dark, saw little dots of light dancing in front of me, felt my body going limp. And then I heard a scream. It was Robert Jr., my oldest son, who was already 15, who was almost a man. He'd heard the noise, had left his room, had seen his father strangling me, and he screamed. But he didn't just scream, he attacked. My 15-year-old son jumped on his father's back and started hitting. He hit with his fists, hit with anger, hit with all the strength he had. Robert let go of me, surprised, and turned to the boy. For a second I thought he was going to hit Robert Jr. too, was going to hurt my son, that a tragedy was going to happen. But it didn't happen. Robert looked at his son, looked at me fallen on the floor trying to breathe, looked at his own hands, and something in him changed. Something broke. He took a few steps back, leaned against the wall, slid to the floor, and started crying. I'd never seen that man cry. In 16 years of marriage, I'd never seen a tear on his face. And there he was, sitting on the kitchen floor, crying like a child, murmuring things I didn't understand. Peter and Anthony had appeared at the door, scared, not understanding what was happening. Robert Jr. was standing in the middle of the kitchen with his fists still closed, trembling, and I was leaning against the wall with the marks of his hands on my neck, trying to catch my breath. That night, no one slept. Robert stayed on the kitchen floor until dawn, alternating between crying and staying silent. The boys stayed in their room together, afraid, and I stayed sitting on the porch, looking at the dark, thinking that this was the limit, that you couldn't go beyond that if I stayed one more day in that house, either I was going to die or one of my children was going to do something stupid trying to protect me. And neither of those options was acceptable. The next morning, when Robert woke up with a hangover, not really remembering what had happened, I looked at him and said the words I'd rehearsed in my head for years.